echoing through the stars, where the Emperor's perfect Mars. From Cadia to Terror's gate, we'll never bend, we'll never wait. Talking fleet with their blue skin. War pugs roar, we always win. War pugs fight with all their might through the darkest depths of night. Against the cringe, we'll never fall. For the Imperium, we stand tall. War pugs fight with all their might through the darkest depths of night. Against the cringe, we'll never fall. For the Imperium, we stand tall. For the Imperium, we stand tall.
War pugs. Hi, guys. All right. It seems like it's been forever, has it not? Since we were all gathered in one place to listen to the glorious tales of Nubby Nubs, Tink, Sarge, and it's so nice to be back. It's so nice to be back. War pugs, Nubby's gonna steal everything. Yay. Guys, it was only a matter of time. It was only a matter of time before they wound up in the Penal Legions. And we know it. Everyone knew this was coming. Okay? This is not a Twitch. Don't get me started on Twitch. The landmines everywhere. Shut up, Lorgar. And of course, Doc, who is the only one that, well, is somewhat relatable. Somewhat. So no shit, here we are. Guys, it's time. It's time for the All Guardsmen party. Let's get back to it. I love this. Now, of course, this is 4 hours, so we're going to check out part of it tonight and part of it tomorrow night. All right, let's go.
Inside the sprawling fortress city, referred to by all but the most pedantic Inquisitors inhabiting it as sector headquarters.
Oh.
No longer
No, Sarge is too relatable, Azores. Sarge is way too relatable. Mental trauma is a thing, and Sarge has just got it.
acting Inquisitor Greg Sargent straightened his orange jumpsuit as the holding room door he'd spent the better part of 7 hours staring at finally creaked open. The two inquisitorial stormtroopers flanking the door, who'd been stuck standing reflexively at attention for the entire time, breathed a little sigh of relief and hastily led the way into the courtroom on the far side. The 4 other stormtroopers in the room relaxed, as well as the impromptu poker tournament that had been occupying the rest of the squad ended without further bloodshed, and Amy, as winner, put Doc and Tink in charge of collecting Twitch, while the two of them extracted the demolitions trooper from the pile of furniture he'd squirreled himself away in. Nubby collected the cards he'd borrowed and scooted the chair he'd subsequently been cuffed to over to the borrowee.
But why are there 6 of them?
Who grudgingly uncuffed him. The stormtrooper blinked in confusion as the little trooper sidled off after his companions without returning the cards. Or the cuffs, for that matter. He shared a pained look with the other stormtroopers as they followed the guardsmen into the courtroom. By unanimous, silent agreement, the unholy mess that had once been the court's tastefully decorated holding room was left for the janitorial staff to discover for themselves.
Yep.
As the 6 guardsmen quite literally trooped into the courtroom, the robe and wig-wearing Inquisitor sitting at its head took them in with the boredly hopeful expression of someone who was almost done for the day. That expression soured as one of the court's side doors opened to admit a cart bearing a teetering, meter-high pile of binders, folders, loose papers, data slates, and precariously balanced scrolls. With an annoyed glare at the scribe hidden somewhere behind the cart, The inquisitorial judge plucked the topmost binder off the pile and cleared his throat.
We're gonna be here a bit.
Greg Sargent, you and your men stand accused of parking in a restricted area? The Inquisitor paused and flipped to the next page. Failing to vacate in a timely manner? He flipped farther. Loading or unloading a vehicle in a no-loading zone?
Judge Dredd wasn't screwing around.
Really? There was a mutter of, "It weren't posted or nothing," from the end of the line of guardsmen, and one of the stormtroopers made a choking sound. The Inquisitor shot a glare at both
probably
of them
Nubby
as he
stole the
snapped
sign.
the binder shut, pulled the next one off the pile, and cleared his throat again. Greg Sargent, you and your men, you stand accused of attempting to bribe a traffic... Excuse me for a second. The Inquisitor leaned over the side of his desk to glare at the cartload of files and the figure behind them until he was...
One serious charge and an entire library's worth of traffic tickets.
finally rewarded with a slightly quavery reply.
Thank you, Hobbit. Can't say for the stream. Reminder, Norfolk Wizard game chapter is and has been out for a while and fan uploaded today. And I'm going to be live streaming forever.
What?
Thank you, Hobbit.
Help with the long words or something? Ignoring the increasing snickering and entirely missing the look of confused recognition on three of the guardsmen's faces, the Inquisitor leaned further and gritted his teeth. Why are they here? They're just more of Quercus's idiots, obviously. Sarge's eyes widened slightly. Twitch let out a faint giggle, and Doc abruptly started blushing as a familiar gray-haired woman in Adept's robes shuffled out and extracted a leather folio from the middle of the pile. Did you think I'd schedule a real case this late in the day? The Inquisitor's expression brightened as he opened the folio. I see. He looked back up to the Adept. So all this is just... He gestured at the teetering pile of documents. The Adept shrugged. Like I said, idiots. Quite. The Inquisitor sat up, straightened his wig, and cleared his throat for a third time.
Okay.
Greg Sargent, as servants of a rogue Inquisitor, you and your men are hereby sentenced to... Wait, interrupted Tink. You can't just sentence us. What about our trial?
Oh.
Nubby stepped forward as well. Hey, you didn't even ask us if we was guilty or not.
You're already
The Inquisitor raised an eyebrow. Are you saying you're not part of Inquisitor Quercus's criminally oversized retinue? Yes, Tink paused. I mean, no, but we definitely didn't do any of that other stuff.
Uh-huh.
And if we did, we had orders, added Nubby, completely ignoring the boot repeatedly slamming into one of his augmetic shins. The Inquisitor raised his other eyebrow. Ah, I see. You're saying your Inquisitor ordered you to... He looked down at one of the binders. Assault, abduct, and otherwise obstruct a traffic officer in the performance of their duties. Well, he might have. Tink trailed off as he finally registered the glares of his comrades. And we definitely had orders for the stuff with the zone. Ow! Nubby doubled over as Sarge stepped forward. Yes, sir. Sarge cleared his throat. Those, traffic offenses were committed in the performance of our duties. All of them.
All of them.
The Inquisitor turned his gaze to the non-com, who stared not quite back with the blankly fixed expression employed by soldiers receiving discipline since time immemorial. After several seconds, The man shook his head, shot an annoyed glance at the massive pile of files and the adept behind them, and sighed. Noted. Greg Sargent, as servants of a rogue Inquisitor, you and your men are hereby sentenced to stasis imprisonment until such a time as the matter of your Inquisitor's loyalty has... Once again, the Inquisitor was interrupted, this time by a cough from the adept and a single envelope being pushed up onto his desk. He glared at the elderly woman, who grinned back innocently until he finally sighed and extracted the envelope's contents. After a few seconds of reading, he paused. His eyes skipped down to the signature at the bottom of the letter, and then up to scan the lines of Guardsmen, until they settled on the white-haired guardswoman in the center. Oh, dear. This is a regrettable situation, isn't it? He glanced to the side. One I certainly could have been informed of before the trial started.
Okay.
The adept just rolled her eyes and pointed a bony finger at the letter. The Inquisitor looked back down and continued reading.
Okay.
Until his expression suddenly cleared. That's certainly an unexpected suggestion. He tapped his fingers on the letter for a few seconds, then looked down to the adept again. Not a bad one, though. Surprisingly reasonable, all things considered. The adept prodded the massive pile of documents between them. It would save on the paperwork.
Okay.
The Inquisitor's lips twitched ever so slightly. And it certainly never hurts to stay on good terms with the Sector Militarum. Yes. He sat up, straightening his wig, and returned his gaze to the assembled guardsmen. Greg Sargent, this court has decided that in recognition of you and your men's years of faithful militarum service and your status as associates of the Lady General von Humperdinck, the charges against you will be deferred indefinitely, and you will be given a chance to redeem yourselves of any crimes you may have committed through service in the penal legions. Dismissed.
It's good as a death sentence.
The shocked silence that followed the gavel strike was broken by a single rising growl. That scheming, conniving, two-faced, lying guardsmen and stormtroopers alike scrambled back. Rat fucking bastard told my mother? The all-guardsman party and the inquisitorial penal legion. So no shit, there we were.
So no shit.
Being hauled off to die in the penal legion.
Yay!
Just like our old commissar always said would happen.
Yay!
Honestly, it shouldn't have come as a surprise, especially given Oak's little comment about arranging for us to get a shorter sentence. After all, the average life expectancy of a penal legionnaire is probably somewhere between 1 and 0 battles. Needless to say, we weren't exactly thrilled with our oh-so-clever Inquisitor, though none of us could quite reach Amy's level of simmering rage. It had taken 3 stormtroopers with shock batons to end our markswoman's little fit. She only started to calm down once she got a chance to read the letter that the adept handed her as she was dragged out. We honestly thought the part where her mom said she understood it was all inquisitorial political bullshit, wasn't her fault, and would always love her were all very touching.
Yes.
Less so the bit about how she wouldn't have to worry about disgracing the von Humperdinck name because they'd already arranged to have her posthumously disinherited and struck from all family records if she died before the charges were cleared.
Yay!
Amy took some comfort in it at least, said it was proof that her mother actually wrote the letter herself. Sarge got an envelope from the adept as well, but it turned out to just be a wad of official paperwork and transfer orders.
Of course.
Given the way the sarcastic old bat had choreographed the whole farce, we'd sort of expected something more. Secret orders-y? Maybe a little note explaining just where this top-secret evidence storage facility Oak wanted us to infiltrate was. And how in the Emperor's name we were supposed to accomplish this while stuck in a bloody penal legion.
Who knows?
The only even remotely relevant thing Doc and Tink found in there was a bit saying we had 10 days to claim our property out of evidence before it was all incinerated.
There's not a warehouse big enough to get all the stuff that Nubby has claimed as his property, okay? The Inquisitor Judge is now Nubby's property.
We somehow doubted that we'd be given a day off from penal legioning to do so. We didn't have too much time to dig through the Adept's packet for more clues, or to bitch about how stupid the whole situation was for that matter. We'd expected to be shipped across the planet or system to some Munitorum depot, but as it turned out, the HQ had their very own penal legion stationed on site.
Hooray!
Presumably to save on gas or something.
Okay.
After a short drive, the stormtroopers hauled us out, and we got our first look at our new home.
Yay!
Camp Redemption, as the big sign over the gate declared it. Or the dump, if you went by the spray paint under it. Honestly, it didn't really look that bad. If you ignored the fact that all the defenses were pointed inwards, it could have passed for pretty much any other guard camp we'd seen. Some prefab buildings, some drill yards full of sweating grunts, same ankle-deep mud. Hell, it even had the same smell, that wonderful combination of body odor, pit latrines, stale rations, and spilled promethium.
Nice!
Sarge took a deep, nostalgic breath, as did Twitch and Nubby. Amy just made gagging sounds. Now, the camp's occupants, on the other hand, we'd apparently arrived right at some sort of muster. But we didn't pay the 2,000 or so shaved and bomb-collared troopers much mind. No, the first thing our trained guardsman senses noticed was the sheer number of commissars strutting about. Your typical regiment, inasmuch as there is such a thing in the guard, tends to sport around one commissar per company, or even less if you were with one of them fancy-pants knobby regiments. We spotted what had to be at least one pointy-hatted bastard per platoon. And that wasn't all. Instead of the Arbite shock squads we expected to be keeping discipline in the ranks, the lanes between each platoon were patrolled by squads wearing the blue-trimmed coats and eagerly homicidal expressions of baby commissars. Twitch informed the rest.
That's just not a good thing. Because while commissars are traditionally a little bit gun happy, commissars in training are make other commissars look reasonable. I'm just saying.
Rest of us that we were all going to die. For once, nobody argued with him. Our grim speculation was interrupted by the arrival of one of those cadet commissar squads, led by a particularly unpleasant-looking real one carrying a whip. The commissar, a weasel-faced bastard somewhere between 60 and 600, depending on how much juvenant they'd pumped into him, angrily informed the stormtroopers that they were late. After a bit of confusion about the transfer orders and why in the Emperor's name they'd given them to us, he ordered his minions to just chain us all together and get us an information.
Let's go.
He'd process us and send us back the uniforms later. The Legion had almost finished forming up in a platoon-wise grid by this point. We were led to an empty spot at the rear corner, where Sarge was instructed to stand out as far as the ankle chain would allow, and the rest of us lined up behind him.
Okay.
Satisfied that we were capable of standing at parade rest without any motivational whipping, the old commissar told us not to move or say anything, and stalked off to stand at the head of our column. The reason for the parade became clear when a scribe with a data slate and an especially fancy commissar, who we assumed was the base commander, arrived and announced that the Inquisition was looking for volunteers. To our surprise, they actually got them. At least at first.
Okay.
At the back of our line, Twitch claimed that this was a clear sign that they were drugging the rations. Doc, who was in the spot ahead of him, actually took him seriously enough to look around and check for signs in the other Legionnaires. We got reminded of the no moving rule by the old Commissar and his whip. We watched as 3 whole platoons of chumps stepped forward, were loaded up into transports, followed by 2 more that were more traditionally volunteered by the Commissars.
Yeah, voluntold.
And then the scribe announced that the rest of what his Inquisitor needed were specialists, starting with the demolitions expert. The old Commissar checked the papers we'd given him and stepped forward. Fortunately for us, the specialist positions must have had slightly higher requirements than literally the first idiot you find, because the scribe and commander came down into the ranks to inspect the candidates. They did, of course, start with our end of the regiment.
Of course.
But we didn't have to do anything drastic to get Twitch off the hook. All it took was one look at this strung-out demo trooper, his own proud declaration that he didn't just know explosives, he slept with them, and a single orc-related accusation in the commander's direction for them to decide to move on to the next candidate.
I've missed Twitch and his obsession with orcs. They're everywhere, you know? You can't get away.
Once the headhunting party passed us, we began to notice whispering and occasional movements in the Legionnaires around us.
Yay.
None of us were close enough to the other platoons to really catch what was going on, aside from it obviously being related to avoiding volunteering.
Obvious.
Since that old Commissar was far too close and attentive for us to consider shifting closer, we didn't pay much of it any mind.
Altharius, Twitch can talk himself his way out of any duty just by trying to volunteer for it, okay?
Until a scuffle in the back ranks of our column drew the Commissar's attention away, and someone behind Twitch muttered, "Punch Greg. Next pass." The demolition trooper turned to stare in confusion at the leader of the platoon behind him, a large, muscle-bound, dark-skinned man, and asked who Greg was. This was apparently not the correct response.
Right.
The dark-skinned platoon sergeant, who Twitch was fairly certain hadn't been there earlier, rolled his eyes and repeated himself twice, then made a frustrated noise and finally clarified to, "Punch Greg, Sergeant, your interrogator, right now."
There you go.
Twitch gave him a fish-eyed look and gestured at the chains connecting his ankles to Doc's and the distance to Sarge out in front of the line, eliciting more eye-rolling until finally realizing what was going on and passing the message on to Doc.
Right.
Then to Amy, Tink, and finally Nubby. The short trooper glanced between Sarge's back and the returning Commissar, and then told Tink to ask, "What for?" The message was passed back down the line to the platoon sergeant, who went bug-eyed, but didn't manage to get an actual reply out before the scribe, just a few platoons away, announced that the last man he needed was someone with a bit of command authority. As the scribe asked if the commander had anyone properly sergeanty, Twitch abruptly got the point and passed the message to just punch Sarge, damn it, back up the line, where it once again stalled at Nubby and Tink, who both took one look at the watching Commissar and his whip, and then nominated each other to do the actual punching. The ensuing argument over whether Nubby or Tink would make the less suitable Sarge assaulter was interrupted by a string of curses and Amy charging past them at Sarge's back. One spot further back in line, Doc looked down at the chain connecting his ankles to Amy's just in time to see his feet fly out from under him.
Yay!
Nubby and Tink watched as the markswoman slammed face first into the mud next to them, blinked, and then immediately resumed their argument, paying absolutely no attention to the approaching Commissar. Fortunately for the pair, before the actual whipping could start, attention was taken off of them by the sudden arrival of the dark-skinned legionnaire whose flying tackle hit Sarge hard enough to pull both the arguing troopers down as well.
Nice.
Twitch, as the only guardsman left standing, watched with a certain amount of satisfaction as Sarge pulled the Legionnaire off him and did his level best to kill the man until the fight was finally broken up by several cadets armed with shock batons.
Yay.
In the silence that followed the exciting round of non-com mud wrestling, the clerk asked if the commander if he'd been drugging the rations again. The commander explained to the confused clerk that they discontinued that program for cost reasons, and starting fights was a common tactic to avoid getting chosen. The dark-skinned legionnaire had a history of it, especially when it involved his subordinates getting chosen.
Okay.
The clerk digested this and then said that sort of behavior sounded remarkably leader-like.
Oh.
The commander grinned and agreed. Down in the mud, the legionnaire started swearing, but quickly shut his mouth as the commander leaned down and asked if he was refusing to volunteer for inquisitorial service. The man shot a final, exasperated look at us as he was hauled off with the rest of the inquisitorial volunteers, and the commander and clerk finally left with the whole parade in tow.
Yay.
Any relief on our part evaporated as the old Commissar stalked forward again and had his cadets haul us out of the mud. Instead of the expected whipping, though, the man gave us a thoughtful look, asked why the Legionnaire would have bothered with us. When he didn't get an answer, the Commissars started flipping through our papers, briefly pausing at Sarge's name and rank to look up and ask, "Really?
Sarge?
Really?" Until his expression abruptly lit up with recognition.
Oh.
The Commissar looked Amy up and down, and in the most self-satisfied voice we'd heard outside an inquisitorial briefing, announced that a penal legion was no place for a lady like her.
Oh,
but
God.
Fortunately, the commissariat would be happy to do the Von Humperdings a little favor. Amy's expression conveyed exactly what she thought of this favor and where he could shove it, but she still put it into words, just to make sure. Unfortunately for the markswoman, it didn't turn out that she had much of a say in the matter, and Cadet Commissar Von Humperding was marched off at gunpoint to get a shower and a fancy new hat, while a tech priest and a pair of servo skulls were brought over to fit the rest of us for some less fancy explosive collars.
Yay!
All in all, she probably got the worst deal. One bomb collaring and servo skull shave job later, the part where they'd tattoo our foreheads would apparently wait until deployment. We were standing around wondering just what the hell had happened, and if we should have done, well, anything about it?
Maybe.
Our discussion on the subject was interrupted by someone behind us asking the exact same question. We turned around to find a group of 4 legionnaires staring at us. Sarge began to say something, and then paused, and stared back for a few confused seconds, trying to place why the 4 bald guardsmen we were looking at seemed so familiar, until Twitch and one of the legionnaires both pointed at each other and shouted, "It's you!" And the rest of us, sans Tink, abruptly recognized all 4 of them as former trainees from our brief stint as inquisitorial drill sergeants. It was hard for us to say who was more surprised. We all just stared at each other for a few seconds, and then the leader of the group, one of the ex-PDF troopers, laughed, saluted Sarge, and said he never dreamed Oak would send us to get them out, and we'd better talk to the interrogator right away.
Oh my God.
At least, as soon as they found him. He'd snuck off during muster to do something or other at our end of the parade grounds. According to them, he looked sort of like Sarge, but bigger, grumpier, and blacker. Had we seen him by any chance? The 4 trainees accepted the bad news about their interrogator like true guardsmen. This is to say, with a mixture of swearing, the exchange of a few packs of smokes in ration bars, and a smug "I told you so" from the former scum who'd apparently just won the running death pool.
Yay!
Our pride in them was only tempered by the fact that the agent Oak had apparently sent to help us had just been hauled off to join some sort of inquisitorial suicide squad.
Hooray!
They took the news that we had no idea what they meant about getting them out, and were there for something completely different with a similar amount of cynicism. The ex-scribe said it explained a lot, and suggested we get back to their barracks to finish the conversation. Doc asked if that was really wise, given how gossipy barracks life can be.
You know, I feel bad for Doc. He's away from his girlfriend. It's gotta be sad.
But the trainees assured him it was okay. They had their very own building separate from the rest of the platoon, just them and their commissar, who was, quote, one of the good ones. Nubby and Twitch both pointed out that the only good commissar was a dead one. The trainees agreed and said we'd understand when we met him.
Okay.
What they meant by that became clear when we entered the lovingly sandbagged and razor-wired prefab and encountered a rotund, red-coated man firmly ensconced in a filthy recliner. Judging by the snoring, the man probably wasn't dead, but judging by the thick carpet of liquor bottles on his side of the barracks, he was definitely working on it. The scribe introduced him as Commissar Kelly, gave him a firm poke in the belly, and when he didn't respond, extracted a data slate from the recesses of the chair and asked whether Sarge wanted to be put down as the new platoon lead, or if one of them should do it. Nubby, Twitch, and the rest of us admitted they were right about their commissar. Once we'd been officially inducted into the platoon, with Sarge as lead, issued proper guard fatigues and some disappointingly power-packless lasguns out of a stash behind the commissar's chair.
Yeah, like, they're not gonna, Penal Legion.
The trainees brought us up to speed. As it turned out, the four of them, one PDF trooper, scribe, cleric, and no longer ex-con, hadn't been scooped up as part of the whole Oak thing. They'd actually been enjoying inquisitorial hospitality since before everything hit the fan.
Oh boy.
Their team had done all right on their first few missions after graduation, as had the other trainees as far as they knew. But a few months back, they'd run into trouble. The PDF trooper explained that it had all been because of our training, you see.
Of course.
All our advice about just shooting anyone stupid enough to mess with the blatantly evil eldritch artifacts had served them well. We probably hadn't meant that rule to include interrogators.
God damn it. Why?
At least, not when there were witnesses around.
Yeah, of course.
The good news was that thanks to that decision, they'd mostly survived that encounter, and the Inquisition investigators had actually agreed with their decision. The bad news was that grunts shooting their superior officers is generally frowned upon. Regardless of what organization you're in, hence the Penal Legion. They'd been in here for the better part of 2 months.
You can't win for losing.
Since regiments were shipped out every 2 or 3 months, that actually made them some of the camp's most senior inmates.
Yay!
They'd arrived at the arrangement with their pet commissar and had been trying to figure out if there was a way to get themselves forgotten when the regiment shipped out. And then the interrogator had turned up and started talking about how Oak wanted to help them escape. Not being chumps, they hadn't believed a word of it and told them as much, until the man finally admitted he needed their help for something and would arrange for one of Oak's allies to extract them all together afterwards.
Okay.
Our former trainees had been a bit dubious.
A little bit,
but the interrogator had obviously been some sort of legitimate, because right after he'd arrived, the Penal Legion had started being assigned work details around the nearby sections of HQ. Somehow, he'd gotten their squad permanently assigned to groundskeeping duty at a complex just down the road, and had been devouring their reports of the place's layout and exterior security these last few weeks. Of course, being an interrogator, the man had been tight-lipped about why they were doing all this scouting. But given that the largest building in the complex had mundane evidence storage written on the front, it didn't take a genius to figure out he was planning some sort of heist. Their theory had been reinforced by the contents of the interrogator's secret stash under the barracks flakboards, where they'd discovered and rifled through about 10 minutes after the man had set it up, and happily cracked open to show us. Aside from the booby traps, which they declared to be decidedly substandard compared to what Twitch had tested them on.
Yes.
The stash contained an inquisitorial stormtrooper uniform.
I'll tell you this, when you're dealing with a penal legion, you're gonna get whatever they could get their hands on, and yes, they will get their hands on anything they can, because they're not expected to live anyway, so they don't really care, okay? So they will steal legitimately everything they can get away with. It really depends on the commissars, okay?
Complete with a badge identifying the interrogator as an inquisitorial HQ guard, as well as some sort of weird data slate with a badge slot, and several stacks of notes and blueprints focused on and under the evidence building.
Okay.
The final item, tucked in the very bottom of the stash, was a 3-ring binder titled The Loyal Servant of Mars, Mark 121 HS Etheric Variable Discipline Collar, Sacred Diagrams and Maintenance Hymnal. Tink immediately seized the technical binder, and after a few seconds of perusing, demanded a mirror and a Type 5 combi tool, or closest thing the trainees had. The ex-con raised an eyebrow at him, and then shrugged, fished a large, slightly bent screwdriver, a cracked shaving mirror, and a few homemade metal shims out from under the commissar's filthy chair, and told him to go nuts. After a few seconds of dismayed staring at the proffered tools, Tink huffed, snatched them up, and went to work.
Okay.
The rest of us watched as the techie began scraping the blunt screwdriver around the seams of his collar in search of something or other, and alternated between cursing at his tools, as well as whichever cogboy had written the manual, and flipping between the 3 different technical diagrams. After nearly a minute of this, the former cleric suggested he worry about the collar later. The interrogator had been trying for days and hadn't even managed to get his collar's cover off. Tink assured him that it was because the man was a technological idiot who didn't know a diode from a donut.
Nice.
Whereas he could read a circuit diagram with both eyes closed and had spent the last year studying technology so advanced it made the Mechanicus's simple little toys look like simple little toys.
Right.
The
Tink.
trainee nodded and agreed, and suggested that it might also have something to do with the fact that the manual was for a completely different model of collar than the ones we were all actually wearing.
Yep.
One without the special anti-tamper feature.
Oh.
Or so he'd heard.
Yeah.
Tink paused, and then very slowly pulled his tools away from his neck and suggested that it might be better if he started with someone else's collar first.
Yeah.
Everyone in the room took a step backwards, except for Twitch, who suggested that maybe this sort of thing should be left to the demolitions expert instead, and then grabbed the screwdriver and instructed Tink to hold still. Tink decided he'd rather not do this, and darted around behind the comatose Commissar with Twitch close on his heels. While Tink and Twitch bickered, the rest of us perused the interrogator's notes on the evidence building, but it was all disappointingly rough. There were several different possible entry points marked on the diagram, each with little notations about pros and cons, as well as several instances of Ask Team's technical demolitions expert about X. Given that said experts were busy playing Ring Around the Commissar while a harried trainee tried to keep them from waking the snoring man up, we decided those could wait for later.
What? But why, though?
The one thing about the notes that really jumped out to us was a complete lack of any sort of objective marker. Everything was either about getting in or getting out.
Okay.
But not a word on where to go afterwards. Noticing our confusion, the ex-scribe pointed at several strings of numbers and letters jotted along the side of one of the pages.
Okay.
He said he was pretty sure the shorter one at the top was the storage unit ID code for Oak's case, and the rest were the IDs for the individual pieces of evidence he wanted us to steal before his trial.
Right.
The real question, according to the former PDF trooper, was just what the hell piece of evidence in Oak's case locker was so bloody damning that having it spontaneously disappear would actually improve things. Sarge, torn between relief that at least some fragment of operational security had been maintained, and feeling like a hypocritical ass, informed the trainees that they really didn't need to know. Sarge's non-answer was accepted by the trainees with only a moderate amount of grumbling about him having become one of them. And over the course of the evening, a plan was formed.
Oh.
Well, it wasn't exactly a plan, per se.
Okay.
More of a chore list, for starters. Sarge wanted to have a look at this evidence building himself. So the trainees did some more fiddling on the napping Commissar's data slate to get him included on the groundskeeping detail.
Yay!
While Sarge was out scouting, the rest of us were to put our heads together on the whole collar problem. After a lot of inane argument, the technical side was assigned to Tink and Twitch, and the pair were given firm instructions to start by actually reading the outdated manual instead of just looking at the pictures.
But the pictures are nice.
They were going to need some proper tools, of course, which was Nubby's job, along with the ex-con, who said he already knew some guys. Finally, since nobody present was willing to let Tink or Twitch fiddle with their collars, Doc was asked to go provide a corpse or 7. The medic had objected, loudly asking why we expected him to just have a bunch of dead bodies lying around.
Because you're Doc.
Tink pointed out that A, he was an Imperial Guard medic, and B, this was a penal legion. The only real problem would be finding ones that still had their heads.
True.
Doc grumpily ceded the point and promised to go volunteer for the Legion's medical corps. The final...
A medical corps in a penal legion. I can't think of a thing that's more redundant.
chore involved the numbers from the notes, or, to be more precise, the very similar ones Sarge vaguely remembered seeing on that little "please collect your stuff" slip mixed in with our transfer orders, the ones that the old Commissar had walked off with. According to the trainees, they'd have been filed away in the commissariat command post, and none of us stood the slightest chance of getting anywhere near them. Luckily for us, we already had someone on the inside.
Oh,
all we had to do was figure out how to make contact without raising any commissarial eyebrows. The trainees asked if we meant that sister who'd come in with us, and were advised not to call Amy that to her face if they valued their teeth.
The
next morning, we got our first taste of life in an inquisitorial penal legion.
Yay!
The day started off at 6 with a public execution,
of course,
followed by a fiery sermon from the legion's head priest, some sort of redemption precantor. We guessed based off of his stuff about cleansing sin through glorious death.
Yeah.
After the sermon, there was a roll call, in which a slightly disgruntled cadet stood in for the commissar we'd left snoozing in his slightly damp chair. And we moved on to some good old guard-issue PT and dummy weapon drills. And finally, another public execution before lunch. Honestly, it was all sort of homey, just like being back in one of the training regiments. If a rather disciplinarian one. Okay. Maybe disciplinarian is putting it a bit lightly, By lunch, the death count was up to 7. And we were pretty sure the Commissars had some sort of daily competition going on to see who could get the most whippings in.
Yay!
Aside from the big public executions, which the trainees said weren't actually a pre-meal tradition, that morning was just busier than usual for some reason.
Yeah, why not?
The leading cause of death appeared to be summary execution by the hands of the cadets for minor, possibly imaginary infractions.
As one does.
This behavior didn't really surprise us. Anyone who's met a baby commissar could have told you there's a reason why they aren't given authority to shoot guardsmen until a tour or two has mellowed them out a bit.
Yeah.
It did strike us as a bit wasteful, though. Even if penal legionnaires were considered even more expendable than your typical guardsman, if that's even possible, one had to wonder how they were managing to keep the legion from dwindling away to nothing before it ever saw combat. That little question was answered for us just after lunch, when an Arbite convoy escorting 4 whole buses of new recruits rolled in. According to one of the trainees, the 4 buses full of new arrivals were the Arbite's weekly delivery of fresh meat.
Okay.
See, there were 2 types of legionnaires in the camp. Unlucky mudfeet and disgraced inquisitorial agents only made up about a quarter of the legion. The rest consisted of hardened dregs of the planet's criminal underworld. Unlike us guardsmen, who accepted our sorry lot fairly easily, the assorted gangers, assassins, heretics, and occasional outright lunatic chafed a little at their new strict military lifestyle, and apparently the more organized members harbored some downright lethal bad blood for each other.
Okay.
Anyway, as the buses unloaded, an entire platoon of legionnaires jumped some of the new arrivals.
Nice!
Some of the cadets moved in with their shock sticks to settle things, and one of them got a bit too cocky and wound up yanked into the melee, which was when their seniors stepped in and we got to see our fancy discipline collars in action.
Ooh.
All at once, every collar in a large radius started beeping, and almost everyone, including us, froze. But the melee's participants were a bit too wrapped in things and didn't stop until their collars went from beeping to an electrical buzzing and they all flopped over into the mud in a twitching heap. The old commissars strode out from the crowd, followed closely by a pair of toadies, as well as an unarmed cadet we belatedly recognized as a very stiff and unhappy-looking Amy. While a few cadets pulled their comrade out from under the pile, the old commissar fiddled with a fancy data slate like the one that was kept under our commissar's chair, and very abruptly, 3 of the legionnaires in the pile didn't have heads. Without a second glance, the man turned on his heel and walked off again.
Well, you gotta get things done, don't you? I mean, you just gotta get things done.
Only pausing to instruct a squad to clean that up, and shoot an unreadable glance at Amy when she began to lag a little behind him. The markswoman immediately sped up and didn't so much as glance in our direction. Afternoons in Camp Redemption were a little more free than the mornings.
Do we have arts and crafts?
The Legion got a second round of drills focused on such complex concepts as which way round to hold a lasgun, ditch digging, and how to serve as a human bomb.
Yay!
But, as guardsmen, we already knew that stuff.
Yeah,
the more senior members of the Legion were split up between various work details, which gave us a chance to get started on Sarge's little chore list. Sarge's scouting mission to the evidence building involved a lot more drain cleaning and hand weeding of poisonous xenoflora than the trainee's description of light groundskeeping duty had led him to believe. The PDF trainee apologized, saying it varied a lot day to day, since they were filling in for a whole range of servitors that had been hauled off by the tech priests. When Sarge expressed interest in this, the trainees further explained that it wasn't actually just the evidence building's servitors. An entire third of the headquarters corpse bots had been pulled for inspection by a team of machoses.
Okay.
something to do with the discovery of a shipment of chaos-tainted servitor control units with inquisitorial markings on some backwater space station. Sorry.
Nice. The Mordians do have commissars in the rank, and those commissars are fucking miserable. And the reason being, the Mordians are more disciplined than the commissars, have better dress uniforms than the commissars, and have no issue. Basically, being a commissar to a group of Mordians sucks. It literally sucks ass in more ways than one, because you're dealing with the fucking Mordians, and if you think commissars are dour, you haven't met the Mordians yet. The Mordians are just about as cheerful as a grave, and they just don't have any patience for them. It's a rumor. It's an unconfirmed rumor that Mordians will complain about the regimental commissar, their state of dress uniform to the person that's in charge of maintaining uniform decor, who is the regimental commissar. Mordians are dicks to commissars. Massive dicks.
Sarge decided to not ask further questions on the subject. During the periods of time when the...
Pretty much the only, really, really well-known regiment that you'd want to be involved with as a commissar is probably the Vestorian Firstborn. I'm just saying. Because if you're dealing with the Maccabian Janissaries, you have to out-fanatic them. If you're dealing with Death Corps of Krieg, you have to out-zeal them. You have to out-bravery the Death Corps of Krieg, which, congratulations. The Mordians, you have to compete with their dress uniforms, and good fucking luck, okay? That's not happened. Harakani Warhawks, they're the Harakani Warhawks. What are you going to do? You're going, Catachan, the Catachan Jungle Fighters, you have to follow Rambo. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Your life sucks. If you're a commissar serving with the Catachans, and especially the Devils, if you're serving with the Catachan Devils, you're dealing with a group of people who are raised on a planet where walking to get your mail is about as dangerous as you've ever faced before in your life. Cadian, not really, Fox Leader. Cadians are excessively good, but no, they have nothing. They have nothing when it comes to how shit your life is as a commissar if you're dealing with some of these other regiments. But if you were a commissar and you just wanted a baller-ass assignment, Vestorian Firstborn. You, okay, we're here, we're going to do the best we can, because if we do something to piss off anybody, we've just, essentially disgraced our entire family line, so we're not going to do that. And, we're going to drink vodka made out of the potato. We're going to make vodka made out of the potatoes. But yeah, it's just vodka and good times. That's Vestorian Firstborn. Warhawks, they're a squad of jump troopers. It's kind of similar in vein to the Elysian drop troopers. Valhallans are fun, of course, yes.
Cadet overseeing the groundskeeping detail, the same morose-looking one that filled in for the commissar during the morning, wasn't watching too closely. Sarge got a good look at the mundane evidence building's layout and outer security. Nothing really interesting jumped out at him about the building proper, but his attention was grabbed by 3 smaller buildings sharing its end of the compound.
Okay.
The one directly adjacent to the evidence building turned out to be a shipping and receiving depot, where the majority of the actual evidence being stored came in and out.
Yay!
Judging by the sweating inquisitorial stormtroopers hauling load after load after load of boxes, it was the one menial job in the complex that hadn't been handed off to the Legionnaires. The second building spotted had an industrial look to it. The trainees said it was a plasma incinerator used for general trash burning and the disposal of various evidence that the Inquisition was done with.
Bodies.
When the cadet commissar wasn't nearby, the PDF trooper quietly informed Sarge that the Legionnaire squad currently running it were a bunch of organized locals best not to be trifled with.
Okay.
More importantly, they were also the primary source of contraband in the camp.
Yay!
The final smaller building wasn't nearly as interesting, at least according to the trainees. They said it was just a laundry processing building, serving both the camp and other headquarters staff in the area. The guys running it were rivals to the incinerator gang, but considerably less organized since two of their leaders had been executed that morning for stealing out of the bins.
Joe, it might not be canon anymore that Angron killed Yarick. It might not be canon anymore. I have to read some stuff into that, but it sounds like it was retcon, thank God.
Tink and Twitch's assignment was a little less straightforward. Sit around in your barracks where no one can see what you're doing wasn't one of the available duties.
Damn it!
So their official job was assisting our Commissar in his functions, both official and bodily. Tink had protested and tried to foist the latter part of the job onto Doc, but the medic had his hands full working in the camp's medical corps, who'd accepted him without so much as a check to see if he knew which end of the scalpel to hold, and immediately set him patching up the constant stream of bleeding legionaries sent over from the remedial drills. Anyway, fortunately for Tink and Twitch, a few discreet life support features built into the Commissar's chair handled the ickier parts of their duty, which is why the trainees said they preferred to just leave him in it. The cadet who turned up at the barracks door pushing a pallet had the same disgruntled expression as the one supervising Sarge's patrol, but he brightened up immensely when Tink and Twitch took it from him and scurried off without asking any questions. Once the Commissar, who'd attained a vague, profanity-filled semblance of consciousness just after lunch, had been placated with his morning drink, and loaded on the pallet, chair and all, he ordered his new handlers on a lovely little tour of the base. Nobody gave Twitch or Tink a second look as they pushed the man around the camp, slurring inarticulate curses at anyone he saw, and unsuccessfully commanding the few female cadet commissars to service him. In fact, nobody even gave him a first look. Both the cadets and the other commissars avoided the trio as much as possible and did their best to ignore them when they couldn't.
Nice.
Tink and Twitch quickly decided they liked the man. It was like having their very own profanity-spewing cloak of invisibility, which only occasionally spit on them and threw empty bottles at their head.
Occasionally. Thanks, Prince. Appreciate it, bud. You should react to Buster McThunder's Ben 10 versus Warhammer. I actually tried to reach out to Buster McThunder. I have not gotten a response yet. It is something I want to do, but I have not been able to get back in touch with him. I'm going to send another message. This weekend, I'm going to be sending a bunch of messages around to try to get a hold of them. If I don't see anybody else has checked out their, like, something, and I'd be the first person to do it. I always like to reach out first just in case. I had a bad experience. I'll just put it to you like that. Very nerve-wracking experience one time. Hey, Seth, how you doing? Thank you, Prince. I appreciate it, bud.
The parade wound up visiting pretty much every building in the camp, with the notable exception of the command post, which the Commissar informed the pair was full of pissant busybodies unfit to choke on my massive... Well, safe to say he wasn't on the best of terms with his nominal superiors. From what Tink and Twitch could gather from the little tidbits of sense mixed in with the incoherent ranting, the man had once been a pretty successful commissarial career, with some fancy noble regiment. Medals, parades, beautiful women expressing their eternal gratitude to their planet's noble saviors and all that stuff.
Yeah, of course.
Right up to the point where literally his entire regiment deserted. Not to the Tau Empire, Twitch checked. The man had just come back from a trip to Planetary HQ when the regiment's other commissar, and they were gone. Gear, armor, tents, camp followers, and all. Nothing left besides an excessively detailed note telling the campaign's senior brass where to stick it. Needless to say, the said brass had been pissed. The Inquisition had gotten involved. Things had gotten political, and here they were, assigned permanent duty to this shithole. Not to the Legion, mind, but the camp itself. Everyone else got out eventually, one way or another, but not him, or that weasel-faced, self-righteous, kissing, ladder-climbing, lying little shit. His one solace in life was that our glorious deaths would doubtlessly be long, horrible, and probably involve orcs with pointy sticks.
Don't tell Twitch.
Twitch wholeheartedly agreed.
Damn it.
Anyway, after a final stop at the quartermaster's for as much booze as the harried man running the stores would give him, plus a few extra bottles he commanded his minions to cram down their pants when the man's back was turned.
Yes.
Tink and Twitch were free to do as much collar tinkering as they could manage, while the old man's increasingly slurred curses transitioned to snores.
Yay!
The cadet never came back for the pallet. Nubby, who'd vanished along with the ex-con trainee, returned to the barrack after everyone else that evening and brought back what looked to be homemade lockpicking tools with him.
Yay!
Unfortunately, he also brought 3 legionnaires, one of whom Sarge recognized from the crew working the incinerator. And there was a bit of disagreement on the matter of payment. A few bottles out of the snoring commissar's stash had originally been offered, but upon arrival, the biggest of the 3 men informed us that the interrogator had run up a tab and we'd inherited his debt.
Damn it!
Needless to say, we saw things differently. Tink and Twitch were in favor of just killing them.
Of course.
We did have 3-to-1 odds, and were all armed with a selection of pokey metal things courtesy of their stop at the quartermaster's office. Doc and Nubby were feeling a bit wussier, though, especially considering the way we'd seen the old commissar break up that one fight. So, the ultimate decision was left to our fearless leader. Sarge briefly debated the merits of establishing superiority by punching the biggest thug in the snout, possibly with his augmetic hand, but judging by the trainee's worried expression, it didn't seem like the smartest fight to pick. And anyway, it was a little bit early to be burning bridges with our only supplier in the camp.
Right.
After a bit of arguing and haggling from Sarge and Nubby respectively, the thugs were sent off with as much booze as the trainees felt we could slip out of the commissar's collection without him noticing.
You know what? He's so drunk, it's basically... Yeah, it's basically a thing. MNO1, this is essentially a role-playing game that happened with a group of friends that is being retold to us. And quite honestly, the Old Guardsman party is about a Guardsman sergeant named Greg Sarge, so Sarge, Sergeant Sarge, a demolitions expert called Twitch, who is obsessed and completely and totally convinced that orcs are trying to kill him, and is just wait for night to fall. That's all I have to say. Nubby Nubs, who steals everything, and I do mean everything. Tink, who can't stop messing with stuff. Amy, who is a former noble turned marksman. Doc, who is the only straight guy in the entire party pretty much, and who currently is dating a hospitaler. It's a thing. It's one of the funniest things I've heard. Half the memes on the channel were born in this series. I'm just saying. Why are there 6 of them?
3 men smugly thanked us for the interest payment and said they expected more next week.
Okay.
We didn't need the trainees to tell us that the arrangement wasn't going to be a stable one. Our shaky relations with the local underworld were only a minor concern compared with the looming 10-day limit on them throwing all our stuff out. We weren't sure what Oak would do to us if his super-secret conspiracy foiling boxes got thrown in the incinerator, but we were pretty sure death would be a preferable alternative. So it was an incredible relief when we finally got our first real break on the 6th day.
Oh!
That morning, thanks to a downright heroic series of fuck-ups by the locals during the live fire drill, nearly 24 Legionnaires landed themselves in the base hospital, while another 10 skipped straight to the morgue. Doc's offer to handle the post-snafu cleanup, including the augmetic recycling, was eagerly accepted by the overworked head medicae. That afternoon, the drunk Commissar's escort was larger than usual, and a bag of tools was crammed under his chair. After the mandatory first stops to empty and refill the crotchety bastard, the parade paused at the morgue, where Tink and Twitch split off while Nubby and the ex-con trainee stayed with the Commissar and kept an eye out for trouble. Inside the morgue, Doc had their 7 Legionnaires who died with their collars on laid out and ready.
Yay!
And watched over Tink's shoulder as the techie brought out his tools and announced his intention to start by isolating the primary control board. A few seconds of fiddling later, Tink had one of the collar's panels open, exposing a jumble of wires, circuits, shaped charges, and a little boxy thing which he didn't recognize from the manual.
Just poke it, it'll be fine.
Immediately started beeping.
Oh, yay!
Tink managed to duck in time. Doc was covered with a light marinade of neck bits.
Yay!
While Doc swore and attempted to fish the Legionnaire's head out from under the table it had rolled under, Twitch seized the tool from Tink and reminded the techie that he'd told him so. The first step had to be disconnecting the detonators. Doc swore again as the second head rolled past him.
Yay!
10 minutes and 4 more headless corpses later, we'd firmly established several things not to do.
Okay.
Especially in regards to the beepy box thing.
Mm-hmm.
Tink was nursing a burned hand and arguing with Twitch over whether they should try wrapping the last collar in some sort of scan-proof fabric they'd wrapped the tools in before they made an attempt on the final volunteer. When the corpse in question abruptly sat up and announced that he actually felt completely fine and would be returning to duty now. There was a shocked pause as everyone tried to shift mental gears, and then the man bolted for the exit.
Yep.
None of us had gotten more than 3 steps before the not quite dead Legionnaire hit the heavy metal and, thank the Emperor, locked fire exit at full sprint and bounced off with the sound like a coconut being hit with a bat.
Well, he's still volunteering for research purposes, for science, guys.
All 3 troopers breathed a sigh of relief, only to freeze as someone started knocking on the door from the other side.
Oh boy.
Fortunately, the knocker turned out to just be the ex-con trainee. Once Doc let him in, he began to ask if we'd set off any alarms, only to break off mid-sentence as he registered the unholy mess of headless corpses, the patina of gore dripping off the walls, ceiling, and all 3 troopers, and the feebly twitching Legionnaire lying in front of the door. The trainee paled and announced that we were all going to die.
Yep.
At Doc's prodding, he expanded, explaining that a posse consisting of the old sour-faced Commissar, his entourage, and the tech priest in charge of the collars had just left the command building, and he was pretty sure they were coming this way.
Yay!
We had just a few minutes to somehow hide the evidence of collar tampering and get out of here.
Now, how you gonna do
they
that?
have the lot of us up on the gallows before dinner time.
Why go to the gallows when a lasbolt is just as easy? I mean, cheaper, more economical.
Doc whimpered, Twitch swore, and Tink pulled the unconscious Legionnaire's pants off. Outside the morgue, Nubby noted that the trainee hadn't come back, and the commissarial posse the man had been so worried about seemed to be headed towards the hospital's entrance. After briefly debating finding somewhere else to be, the little trooper decided that what was probably needed was a good old-fashioned distraction. He eyed the composition of the oncoming group, and the chair-bound commissar on the pallet next to him, who'd worked his way through half the bottle of sacre they'd given him after breakfast to keep him quiet, and then grabbed the pallet's handles. As he pushed his cargo on an intercept course for the posse, he leaned forwards. Sir, I was wondering, what's your opinion on tech priests? The approaching group saw Nubby and his pallet coming. It was a bit hard to miss them, given that the drunken old man riding it was slurring at the top of his lungs about how if he had it his way, all those smug metal bastards would be rounded up and shot like the heretics they were. His volume only grew as, at Nubby's prodding, he began expounding the various shortcomings of the Martian priesthood, ranging from the moral to the personal to the sexual, and what he felt should be done about them. The group immediately began to curve around the obstacle, only to find Nubby and the Commissar turning to match them, and then turning again as they tried the opposite side. The demented game of anti-chicken continued until, at a range of around 15 meters, the ranting Commissar spotted the group's tech priest and loudly instructed his minion to push him closer.
Oh, God.
Nubby did as ordered. Faced with the fearsome might of Nubby's speeding pallet of doom, the approaching Commissar and his cadets abandoned the field of battle and dodged off into the mud next to the path. The tech priest tried to dodge with them, only to find himself back in the line of fire as the white-haired cadet next to him suddenly slipped on the mud and shoulder-checked him back onto the path. The pallet smashed through the cogboy's shins like they weren't even there, because they weren't. The grav plate that had replaced them bobbed over the metal edge without it even roughing the hem of his robes. The Commissar riding it, on the other hand, the now empty sacre bottle shattered spectacularly as it hit the tech priest's metal jaw and the man reeled backwards, only to be brought up short by the liver-spotted hand gripping the front of his robes. The four cadet commissars watched as their nominal superior, with a mixture of shock, horror, and, in Amy's case, poorly disguised glee, as he drunkenly menaced the terrified tech priest with the jagged remains of his bottle, and Nubby cheered him on. Sadly, the show didn't last long. Nubby's cheers abruptly cut off as his collar sent a few thousand volts through his neck, and the weasel-faced old commissar stomped forward and knocked both the bottle and the tech priest out of Commissar Kelly's hands. The chair-bound commissar started to angrily slur something, only to pause as he registered who'd disarmed him, and instead fixed the man with a look of immense hatred, which the other commissar returned in kind. After nearly 2 minutes of mutual death glaring, which is a lot, at least if you're doing it properly, the more vertical of the pair broke off and shifted his glare to Nubby. He gave the still-twitching trooper a few stress-relieving kicks to the ribs, instructed one of his flunkies to load him onto the pallet, and returned both him and the commissar to our barracks, and resumed his march towards the hospital. When the commissar and his posse finally entered the morgue, with their bolt pistols drawn and a worried-looking head medicae bringing up the rear, they found a blood-splattered Doc standing over a similarly stained pile of clothing and dogmatic body parts. The medic snapped to attention, attempted to salute, nearly brained himself with the severed metal arm he was holding, and, following the first rule of survival-oriented soldiers since time immemorial, kept his damn mouth shut.
Yes.
The commissar eyed him for a second, and then swept his gaze around the morgue, taking in both the bloody mess and the complete lack of any other living legionnaires in the room. He motioned to the tech priest, who waved around something that looked like a cross between a data slate and an auspex, and then pointed at the pile next to Doc. At the Commissar's signal, Amy moved forwards, dug around in the bloody mess, and, after the slightest pause, extracted one of the detonated collars from it. The Commissar fixed Doc with an absolutely menacing gaze and asked what in the Emperor's name he thought he was doing here. Doc didn't need to feign the panic in his voice as he began rattling off the Genarian Regiment regulations, 5th edition, of course, on the post-mortem recovery of war gear, augmetics, and personal effects of greater than 50 thrones value.
Right.
The Commissar's expression didn't change, but the cadets behind him shared a disbelieving look, and the head medicae let out a pained groan. Amy, catching on immediately, summoned every ounce of incredulous disgust she could muster as she asked if he was really stupid enough to try and salvage a live discipline collar. Doc just blinked at her and claimed that it hadn't been that hard, at least not after he'd figured out you could skip the bone saw if you set them off first by poking the beepy bit with a scalpel.
Yeah.
Inside the large medical waste bin at the far end of the room, Tink, Twitch, and the trainee listened as the tech priest ranted at the head medicae about agreed-upon procedures and standards of training for all medical corps personnel. Any relief on their part quickly evaporated as the Commissar told the arguing pair to save it for later, and asked the tech priest whether he was sure there weren't any other legionnaires present. All 3 troopers in the bin tightened the strips of scran-proof cloth they'd torn off the tool bag and wrapped around their collars, and hoped like hell that Tink actually knew what he was talking about for once. Out in the room, Doc suffered a moment of heart failure as the tech priest waved around his auspex slate and announced that there was some interference from all the screamer signals, but he was picking up at least 2 still active collars in the room. The Commissar immediately tapped something in his own data slate. Doc dropped to the floor, thrashing and clutching at his sparking collar, and so did the not-quite-dead legionnaire on one of the nearby tables. The Commissar pondered this new development for a second, then shot the man in the head with a bolt pistol.
Hey, there you go.
There was a slight rustle from the bin as Twitch misinterpreted the sound, but fortunately, nobody noticed, and Tink and the trainee managed to hold them down.
Hey, yay!
The Commissar, once he deactivated the shocker, gave Doc a brief but incredibly condescending lecture on penal legion regulations vis-a-vis corpses and collars, and how the latter were the sole responsibility of the commissariat.
Okay.
He wrapped it up by punching a command into his data slate and holding his thumb against the biometric reader on it, and the freshly decapitated legionnaire's collar popped open. His little demonstration done, the Commissar began to collect his posse, only to pause and shoot a look at where Amy was still standing next to Doc. In a thoughtful voice, he asked if they knew each other.
You know, now that Nubby knows where the thing is.
Doc's no was cut off by Amy's yes. After a slight pause, in which the Commissar gave Amy a very piercing look, the markswoman explained that they'd just arrived in camp together. The Commissar stared at her some more, and then shrugged, and announced that she wouldn't have any problems handling his discipline then. Amy, without even the slightest hesitation, turned and popped Doc in the jaw hard enough to knock the medicae across the nearest table. The Commissar just sighed, shook his head, and held out his whip to her as his cadets dragged Doc outside towards the parade ground. When Sarge returned from his groundskeeping detail, he was less than thrilled to find Doc lying on his stomach with a pile of inexpertly applied bandages on his back. Nubby with a similar set around his burned neck, and Tink and Twitch arguing with each other about who'd been wronger. The only real bright side of the whole thing, aside from nobody actually getting killed, was that Doc managed to get in a brief word with Amy as she cut him down from the whipping post. He was able to direct the markswoman towards the camp chapel, and that evening, the ex-cleric managed to finally catch her alone long enough to relay our urgent request for our mislaid transfer paperwork. At Tink's request, the trainee also asked if she could get us one of those fancy collar-removing data slates, but Amy said that wasn't going to happen.
No.
While they had her dressed up like a redcoat, they sure as shit didn't trust her like one. Not only did the old Commissar have his minions following her and snitching on her every action when she was out of his sight, she wasn't even allowed to have a weapon, and he personally frisked her every time they left the command building. Honestly, that last bit surprised the hell out of us. Not because it didn't make sense, but because none of us ever imagined Amy had the self-control to not at least try to kill the unpleasant old bastard on the spot. Anyway, Amy claimed that even if she could score us a Commissar's data slate, they could only remove collars with the biometric authorization of their owner, and she didn't see herself getting out the door with an unconscious redcoat draped over her shoulder. The best she might be able to do would be a cadet's data slate, but that was what our Commissar had, so the cleric trainee told her not to bother. So, no fancy data slate for us, but she promised to get the orders to us in time for our infiltration.
Yay!
Which Sarge's plan said was 4 days off. And yes, the term was definitely plan, because even Twitch and Nubby's most harebrained schemes had more structure than what our fearless leader was proposing. Okay. Maybe that's a bit harsh.
Maybe.
But Sarge's favorite all-purpose command, handle it, only appeared at 5 points. But that's still 5 more than anyone who's about to break into an inquisitorial facility would ever say they're comfortable with. The general theory was to start by...
Handle it is literally the best thing that you can hear in some cases when you're in the military, and the worst in other situations. Handle it is my favorite set of orders in most cases, because you're not going to like what I do, and I'm not going to care.
Taking the majority of the interrogator's notes on entry points, especially all the details about the defunct tunnels under the whole compound, and chucking them in a bin. We figured that if the man felt putting on a headquarters security uniform and going in the front door was good enough for him, it would be good enough for all of us, too.
Yeah, why not?
Of course, we were shy at least 4 of said uniforms, but we figured a visit to the compound laundry would fix that.
Yeah, why not?
Problem was, the fellows working the place were beyond useless. We'd known their recent run-in with the commissariat would leave them cagey, but the second Nubby even floated a suggestion their way, they'd all clammed up and threatened to call the Commissars. Sarge's personal visit to their building and offer to swap duties with them, which had been met with outright hostility and paranoid accusations of working for one of the other crime families, had rounded off the general cavalcade of failure that was the 6th day. So, we needed a bunch of uniforms we didn't know how to get, and to remove a bunch of collars we didn't know how to remove.
Right.
And that was still before we even got in the door.
Right.
Once inside and past the manned checkpoint that was the main barrier to entry, Tink and the ex-scribe were fairly certain we'd be able to move through the majority of the facility using the security badges everyone who went in there seemed to be wearing. We just had to get one.
Yeah.
Somehow, and use the card-reading data slate that had been in the interrogator's stash to copy it onto a few other cards. Also acquired somehow. The incredibly vague plan after that was to walk around, potentially kidnap some clerk and force him to disgorge some directions, and eventually find wherever they'd shoved our gear into Oak's boxes.
Right.
The one actual firm part of the whole thing was that since that was the day they'd be throwing our stuff out, nobody should blink when we showed up and grabbed it. Now, what they'd think when we rolled up to Oak's evidence locker... Anyway, skipping over the question of how we'd get access to the evidence for what seemed to be the biggest case in the subsector. At least the interrogator's notes had some reassuring bits in them about security screamer tags only being applied to the contents of evidence boxes. Theoretically, we would be able to go in and swap Oak's boxes for some of the containers in his locker, and leave with the leftover empties without setting off any alarms.
Okay.
Then it would just be a matter of taking all of our stuff out of the shipping entrance under the guise of incineration, and then just cheesing it back to somewhere. So, yeah. Safe to say, we were a bit dubious. Still, though, if Oak had
Come on. You can do it.
told the truth about them putting everything we'd had on the Arbite vessel into storage, once we got to our locker, we'd have weapons, grenades, and 3 crates of high explosives to work with. And in our experience, that could handle pretty much anything.
Especially in
Time
Twitch's
being limited
hands.
and the idiots on laundry duty being uncooperative, the next day we launched what we could call a hostile takeover. Emphasis on the hostile part.
Okay.
Given their paranoia, they were probably expecting something. But we didn't show up at their barracks in the middle of the night with a bunch of lead pipes and making faux subtle comments about unrefusable offers. That's civvy thinking there. Any proper soldier can tell you that even the most low-key training drills offers an amazing array of ways for someone to check themselves off the active duty roster, especially if their comrades are willing to give Murphy a little hand. First,
if you don't know what he means by Murphy, Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and you're in a Penal Legion, so everything's gone wrong at this point. You're just along for the ride at this point, and there's nothing you can do about it. Welcome to hell. Welcome to hell, Population U. There are a few problems that cannot be solved with sufficient kaboom. You are right, Red Rudy. You are exactly right, and this has yet to be a disproven fact.
There was the catastrophic knee dislocation during PT. Then, the unfortunate accident where 2 Legionnaires fell into the razor wire they were practicing clearing.
Oh no!
And the poor fellow whose collar malfunctioned during the mud crawl.
Oh no!
Obviously. This all caused a bit of distraction in their platoon mates.
Little bit.
Which was probably the reason that 3 more of them managed to misplace their assigned dummy weapons.
No!
The commissar in charge of their platoon seemed willing to go easy on them, but at the arrival of a bunch of cadets, one of whom promptly began asking pointed questions about the disciplinary regulations, he decided to make a bit of an example. That afternoon, after the whipping and publicly announced reassignments back to remedial drills with the latest busload of FNGs, the commissars in charge of the work detail assignments asked for volunteers with prior laundry experience.
Oh!
For some reason, nobody aside from us stepped forward. Laundry duty involved a disappointingly high amount of actual duty, largely due to the commissar that had previously managed the detail sticking around to make sure we didn't burn the place down or anything.
Come on, don't you trust us?
The man actually seemed pretty impressed by our well-honed stain scrubbing and underparts starching skilled, and willingly turned command over to the morose cadet officially overseeing us at the end of the shift. Still, though, the way he was looking over our shoulders while we worked was enough to discourage us from trying to pocket anything. It wasn't a total waste, though. We were at least able to ascertain that suitable numbers of HQ Stormtrooper uniforms came through for us to borrow a few, and we did indeed spot one with an ID badge carelessly still attached.
Okay.
That specific uniform wound up misfiled back into the in pile.
Oh no.
Upon our return to base, we received even more good news. During their medically mandated light commissar sitting duty, Doc and Nubby had come up with a actual non-suicidal idea for dealing with the collars.
Good.
Well, actually it was Nubby's idea, mostly, but that didn't necessarily rule it out. While sitting around watching the old commissar work his way through the 4th bottle of the day, Doc had regaled Nubby with an in-depth, profanity-filled account of Tink and Twitch's decapitation experimentation. At the point where everyone except the unfortunate medic had hidden in the bin, Nubby raised the question of whether we really needed anything better than the scan-proof fabric. After all, if the stuff could block the tech priest's scanner, wouldn't it also block the Commissars' data slates and whatever they used to watch for escapees?
Oh.
Doc's excitement over this novel idea soured somewhat when he was nominated to be the test subject while Nubby played mad scientist with the old Commissar's data slate.
Why?
So, after a few hours of painful experimentation, at least on the testee's part, Nubby and Doc delivered the verdict that an anti-scan scarf would definitely, totally, 100% do the trick.
Okay.
At least, if we kept the heist to under 20 minutes, that is, because after that point, the collar would start loudly beeping and administering increasingly powerful shocks until the covering was taken off. Doc estimated, using some completely arbitrary math, that if we really had to, we could stretch it to a whole hour before the shocks became incapacitating, and maybe another half hour after that before they became fatal. The ex-scribe trainee corrected this figure down to just 40 minutes, because at that point, the collar would just give up and detonate. He'd seen it happen to some of the legionnaires that the Commissars had assigned to run messages, back before the Inquisition got tired of cleaning up the bodies and told them to knock it off. Doc got...
Okay, I just stopped believing the Inquisition tired of cleaning up the bodies.
really pale at this and decided to leave further testing to Tink and Twitch, who were both less than thrilled to be shown up by Nubby of all people. Our moderately productive session of possible excuses for why a squad of inquisitorial stormtroopers would show up in the evidence building wearing a collection of scarves, neckerchiefs, or other neck-covering attire was interrupted by someone knocking on the barracks door. Sarge's disgust was palpable when he opened it to find the same big stupid bastard that had shaken us down for booze a few days ago, this time backed up by a full 8 flunkies as well as the badly limping boss of the former laundry gang. The lead thug glowered at Sarge in a manner that was probably supposed to be threatening, but mostly came off as constipated, and informed us that we owed his new best buddy an apology, a material one. Sarge barely managed not to roll his eyes before the idiot rubbed his fingers and thumb together in front of his face. Once again, we were stunned by just how suicidally stupid these guys were. It wasn't just that they'd shown up at our door to try and intimidate us with what was, at best, roughly equal strength. They also had the absolute gall to demand not only the handover of laundry detail, but the old Commissar as well. Sarge did actually try to talk them out of it, even if it was mostly just to buy time. He began to say something along the lines of, "Just give us 3 more days to enact our secret inquisitorial mission, and it's all yours," but managed to catch himself in time and converted it to a vague request to work the job until all the old laundry crew was healed. This, coupled with some alcoholic reparations, the return of most of Tink and Twitch's tools, and the owing of a 1, seemed like a more than reasonable offer to us. Even the laundry boss seemed to think so, judging by the way his expression fell and he started backing up when the big thug rejected it. Sarge's expression, on the other hand, didn't even change as his sucker punch hit the idiot in the jaw. Surprisingly, the lead thug didn't fall down. At least, not until one of the full liquor bottles the rest of us had been collecting for the bribe hit him square in the nose with every ounce of force Doc's throwing arm could muster. That shot was followed by 2 more bottles courtesy of Tink and Nubby, which hit the nearest 2 flunkies in the stomach and groin respectively.
Ow!
Twink's bottle had a little flaming rag stuffed in the mouth on...
Of course.
All things considered, it was probably a good thing that it just bounced off his target's head with a comical thunk as opposed to shattering like he'd intended. Those thugs, remaining upright, immediately drew a combination of shivs, pipes, and clubs and started to advance, only to scatter backwards as Sarge kicked their leader down the short stairs like an especially ugly bowling ball. The arrival of the 4 trainees on both their flanks was a bit redundant. The one-sided scuffle was brought to an abrupt halt by a stream of slurred profanity, an empty bottle to the back of Tink's head, and a long shock from all of our collars as the old Commissar woke up and demanded to know who'd been stealing his drinks. There was a brief pause, in which the few thugs still capable of fighting visibly debated whether to try and take us while the collars had us down, and unanimously decided to just cheese it before any real redcoats showed up.
Yeah, let's go.
All weapons were immediately stashed, and all unbroken bottles, including Twitch's still burning one, were retrieved from mud and returned to their rightful place next to the old Commissar's chair. Tink exchanged an open one with a straw in it for the man's data slate before he could shock us anymore. As the thugs staggered, crawled, or were dragged back off to whichever barracks they'd come from, the former laundry boss, who'd made the wise decision to just stand very still at the back of the group and see how things worked out, sighed, and advised Sarge to be very careful before limping off after his new friends. Despite what certain superiors of ours have said about our mental faculties in comparison to those of a waterlogged gerbil, we were a hint when we were explicitly handed one with a little red bow on top. That's why the 5 unfamiliar legionnaires lounging around the nearest bathrooms the next morning were so surprised to find all 9 of us treating Sarge's morning shit as a group exercise. Similar groups were dissuaded during roll call, service, and PT, as well as a larger group who seemed to be aiming to eat their breakfast next to us until the combined weight of Sarge and Twitch's concentrated glaring convinced them to find something else to do.
Yes.
The goons obviously could take a hint too.
Obviously.
Because when we got to the training field, we encountered a pair of cadets splitting incoming legionnaires up into new squads for morning drills. When the 2 baby commissars spotted us, they immediately began homing in and started to bark off what sounded like carefully memorized group assignments. Only to pause as none of us moved, and they belatedly registered the snoring old commissar we'd decided to bring with us.
Nice.
Sarge casually informed them that we had orders to stay as a unit, and asked if they wanted to have a word with our commissar about changing that. The 2 cadets blanched, shared a look, and then left without saying anything more.
Never underestimate the power of a drunk old bastard.
The downside of bringing the commissar with us was having to literally carry him, the
Very
chair,
true, Apop.
and the pallet through a full morning of drills, which made us like a bit of a sitting duck. Aside from the occasional barrage of rocks or mud and unsuccessful attempts to sick other commissars on us, the chief hazard was periodic attempts to sneak up on us and snatch or shank someone, which is a bit hard to pull off in an open bloody field, especially when one of the targets is a professional paranoid. Still though, had to give them points for persistence.
True.
Most folks would quit after seeing a comrade lose both eyes to a crazed, fork-wielding demolitions trooper. There was a brief lull during lunch, followed by one last attack by a lone legionnaire who attempted to grab Sarge in the chow line. At least, we assumed it was an attack. Just, like, a really half-assed one.
Okay.
Fortunately, the guy only received a little tap on the nose and a light round of kicking after the trainees pointed out that he wasn't affiliated with any known crime family, and mostly just ran messages for people. After some awkward sorries, a few band-aids, and some apology boos from under the commissar's chair, we received a note from Amy directing us to meet her the following evening and collect our orders. The afternoon was blissfully shanking attempt free.
Yay!
There was some concern about the commissar watching portion of the team, as well as what might happen to our barracks while we were away, but a deal was worked out with the 2 depressed cadets who actually handled all the commissar's duty, which entailed one of them accompanying their boss and Twitch during his daily walk, while the other managed our laundry detail.
Yay!
In exchange for the ex-scribe trainee doing the day's paperwork. By the end of our shift, Nubby's increasingly filthy Legion-issue jacket contained 3 ID badges, as well as some promisingly scarf-like bits of clothing. And a test run was made from both the front and freight entrances to the evidence building under the guise of an unscheduled uniform delivery. Rather worryingly, both runs pushed the 20-minute mark without even actually getting past security.
Yeah, that's a bad
sign. That night, the plan was revisited, and we came to the uncomfortable conclusion that unless Tink and Twitch suddenly figured out how to get our collars off, we were going to need to bring one of those Commissar data slates on the mission with us to periodically reset their timers like they did on work details. This wasn't a problem in and of itself. We had one of those data slates just lying around. The real issue was that it needed to be periodically refreshed by its designated user via the slate's biometric scanner. We fervently hoped Amy was going to be able to grab a slate and join on the mission, because the only other option involved an unconscious volunteer and a laundry hamper, which we were pretty sure would raise some eyebrows at the security checkpoint.
Just have someone go along and say, that is a silly question to ask. Then you'll be fine. It's the easiest way to get along with things. Trust me, I watch Star Trek.
In retrospect, this might have been a bit of an optimistic take on things. The following day went well. Suspiciously so, in Twitch's opinion. The rest of us were just glad to not have any new crises crop up on the day before our mission. The drunken old Commissar was brought along to drills again, but aside from a few Legionnaires obviously keeping tabs on us, there was no sign of the opposing force, and things went smoothly.
Yay!
Or at least, as smoothly as a round of field exercises performed while carrying a belligerent, hungover old man with the power to administer shocks directly to your spine could go. The real good news was when we managed to turn up 2 more badges in the incoming laundry. One of them belonging to a stormtrooper sergeant who we'd seen on duty at the evidence building. Counting the one in the interrogator's stash, that brought us up to 6.
Yay!
Enough to get all of us, plus Amy or one of the trainees, past the automated portion of the building's security. Well, at least if Tink was right about the card slate's ability to, as he put it, clone the creds. Otherwise, the majority of our little strike force would probably be facing some pointed questions about why someone whose badge granted them access to a nutrition technician was trying to enter an evidence storage building. There was also a slight issue of the names and pictures physically printed on the cards, but having
Look, just say you had a bad pick today. That's all you need to say.
Done our share of gate guard duty, we were fairly certain that nobody actually cared to look at those.
This is alarmingly true.
In any case, we had
some guy get in trouble one time because some random security guy decided he was going to test security on the end of the dock, and this poor bastard let this guy on with an ID. Now, the person that was checking in was the most Poindexter looking dude you ever seen in your life. The picture that he had was Fiona Apple.
Enough cards. And while we had our cadet overseer distracted, napping for half the shift, an entire hopper load of stormtrooper uniforms, complete with helmets and assorted neckwear, was crammed behind a dryer. With the scan-proof scarves Tink and Twitch had made, a little pouch of supplies made from the last scraps of the fabric, and a set of vaguely official-looking orders drawn up by Doc and the ex-scribe, the physical prep was done. All that was left to do was meet up with Amy and hope like hell she had our intel. The note that Amy's messenger had passed to us said she'd be in one of the storage buildings near the commissary end of the base.
Commissary.
Half an hour before the evening lockdown. Being a bunch of suspicious bastards, we'd scouted the location, double-checked her note to make sure that the handwriting matched and there weren't any subtle "the commissariat is onto us" hints, and brought our entire force along, Commissar included, just in case it was all a cunning trap. The good news was, it wasn't. The bad news was that this was just because it was an extremely uncunning one. We spotted the large cluster of aggressively nonchalant legionnaires loitering in the general vicinity of our destination from halfway across the compound. The big dumb bastard sitting on the building's front step was just a redundancy. It belatedly occurred to us that, firstly, passing secret notes and arranging clandestine meetings is exactly the sort of thing that the criminal underworld is known for. Secondly, there might have been a thing or two we forgot to tell Amy about our current situation. And finally, unless there was a second female cadet commissar with sororitas white hair, she'd just entered the building. A brief confab was held, which mostly consisted of everyone taking turns blaming each other, and then Nubby, Twitch, and 2 of the trainees broke off to loop around while Sarge led the rest of us right into the hornet's nest. The big familiar goon gave a solid attempt at a shit-eating grin when he saw us, but the 2 black eyes, broken nose, and missing teeth made it a bit hard for him. He settled for some sullen glaring and a slurred command for the rest of us to stay put, while Sarge was invited side for a little chat with the boss. The smallish guard-issue prefab storage shed was, well, a guard-issue prefab storage shed.
Okay.
It had a floor, walls, boxes, shelves, and, because this was a penal legion after all, a bunch of locking metal grates that completely failed to deter anyone armed with a screwdriver. Thin piece of metal or sufficiently strong stick. The sign next to the door, sporting the words "Thieves will be disemboweled with an entrenching tool," was presumably a more effective deterrent. Even the table bolted in the middle of the floor was guard issue, as were the little folding chairs around it, and the 2 goons flanking the entrance, and especially their freshly sharpened entrenching tools. The at least half Ogren guarding the far door was starting to push it, though, and while Amy was technically the definition of guard issue, the small, dapper man sitting at the table with her, sporting a striped suit and a silenced auto pistol, most definitely wasn't.
Okay.
The mob boss, because there was no imaginable way the man could be anything else, gave Sarge a look that would have been intimidating if A, Sarge hadn't spent the last few years in inquisitorial service, and B, the man had a chin, like, at all. It was just a steady, regular slope from his little mustache to his abnormally large Adam's apple. It was amazing. The only thing harder than not staring was not laughing, neither of which are smart when the other guy has a gun and you don't.
This is true.
So, in a quiet sort of desperation, Sarge dropped the mask from his awareness and plopped into the free chair across the table from Amy. In a tone of forced chattiness, he asked how the markswoman's day was going. Amy rolled her eyes. You know, just sitting around, being the bait in this half-assed trap because some stupid-ass dipshit couldn't bother to tell me they'd started a fucking gang war with the chinless wonder over here.
Yeah.
The silence that followed Amy's little remark was a choked one. Quite literally in the case of one of the goons behind Sarge, whose face was screwed up into something resembling a felid's anus. The mob boss attempted to simultaneously glare at both Amy and the unfortunate goon, but even if he could have pulled it off, the delayed beso from the half-ogren ruined it.
Nice.
In an attempt to regain some semblance of control over the situation, the man slammed his auto pistol onto the table, rounded on Sarge, and began to bark question at the non-com.
Okay.
For his part, Sarge took one look at the mob boss, felt his eyes drag inexorably towards the area where the man's chin wasn't, and abruptly turned back to Amy to loudly ask if she'd heard we'd gotten assigned laundry duty again. Whether it was an effort to help Sarge in his moment of desperation, or just sheer desire to talk to someone who wasn't wearing a stupid pointy hat, Amy responded with some inane chatter about a cadet commissar who'd somehow managed to attach a bomb collar to himself. And the pair started trading camp gossip in the best tradition of guardsmen ever.
Hey, Proxima.
The mob boss and the assorted goons just sort of stared, obviously unsure of how to handle being blatantly ignored in favor of anecdotes about what Nubby found in the dumpster behind the quartermaster's tent. Eventually, though, the conversation meandered to the topic of the transfer orders Amy had been asked to procure and where they'd wound up. The markswoman jerked a thumb at the big goon and the grimy wad of papers in one of his fists and asked what was so important about them anyway. Unfortunately, the mob boss took this as his cue. In an attempt at a tone of smug authority, the mob boss announced that he was deeply interested in Sarge's answer as well.
When you, quite simply put, prove to somebody that you're not even worth the consideration that you haven't gotten so far.
What possible reason could there be for a washed-up ex-guardsman to be secretly meeting with Commissar Sourface's favorite pet? Sarge ignored the question, but raised an eyebrow at the word pet. Amy didn't actually respond, but her expression clearly conveyed her complete lack of desire to pursue the subject. Instead, she asked whether it was true that Twitch had tried to stab her messenger to death with a plastic spoon.
But why?
Sarge began to explain that it was actually a fork, at which point the mob boss's patience finally ran out and he screamed at both of them to just shut up. After a few seconds of hyperventilating, the chinless mob boss made a visible effort to reclaim his whole suave villain persona. He announced that if we weren't willing to talk, then they'd better just have a look and see what was so important about the papers Amy had been carrying. Lacking a suitably big and swivelly chair in which to lean back and menacingly tent his fingers, the mob boss settled for tilting his folding chair as far as it would go.
He needs a cat, or at the very least a stuffed animal to pet while he's in there with them.
He gestured at his goons with one hand while using the other, the one with the loaded gun in it, to steady himself against the table. There was a brief pause in which the assorted goons waited to see if their boss was going to accidentally shoot someone, and then a second pause as the big dumb goon drew out a rather grimy wad of papers and visibly balked at the sheer amount of words on them. With a deeply furrowed unibrow and one finger moving across the page, the big goon began laboriously reading the 4-page standard administratum boilerplate at the head of our transfer orders. The mob boss sighed, starting to raise his palm to his face, nearly tilted over backwards, and grudgingly yelled at the goon to skip ahead to the part where it said why we'd been transferred to the Penal Legion. In some ways, the chinless mob boss was more clever than, well, anyone else we'd met, which is honestly pretty sad when you think about it.
True.
See, instead of shrugging off the concept of a bunch of guardsmen being sent to an inquisitorial penal legion for traffic tickets, he started asking questions.
Oh, God.
Specifically, after his broken-nosed goon slurred out the fourth count of failing to vacate in a timely manner, whether there was any non-traffic-related convictions. Both Sarge and Amy struggled to keep their poker faces in place as well. After nearly a minute of searching, the goon read off, aiding and abetting the rogue Inquisitor, some I got a guy with a Q name. The mob boss managed to keep his composure too, but Sarge could almost hear the oh-so-familiar "I'm surrounded by idiots" as he told his man to try sounding it out. The intense focus involved in deciphering the goon's slurred speech while simultaneously keeping his chair balanced and maintaining the closest thing to a suavely confident expression possible without an actual jawline was probably why the man didn't notice both guardsmen casually shifting around in their seats.
Okay.
When, on the fourth attempt, the hench goon managed, "Q Argus with a Q," the mob boss's composure finally broke. He got as far as, "Wait, Quercus? You mean Inquisitor Bloody Oak? The same Bloody Oak that we've..." only to be interrupted by a pair of sounds.
Oh.
One was a subtle metallic groan from the table, where Sarge's augmetic fingers had sunk up to the first joint into the surface. But this was overshadowed by a much louder and surprisingly high-pitched weeing noise coming from the part Ogren standing behind Amy. While the mob boss ranted, the markswoman had casually reached one of her arms behind her head, and while she didn't have quite the same crushing power of Sarge's augmetic grip, her targets were much, much softer.
Not the Ogren. What did the Ogren do? He's a polite lad.
Every man in the room, even the mob boss still balancing on his stupid chair, stopped and stared in sympathetic horror as the unfortunate part Ogren swayed with every slight movement of the markswoman's hand. The tableau lasted a good 10 seconds before Amy delivered a final vicious twist.
Oh!
And the giant goon toppled over like a slow-motion video of a tree falling, which gave Amy just enough time to let out a panicked squeak as several hundred kilos of goon landed directly on top of her.
Nice.
The shocked pause continued, now punctuated by sobbing moans from the part Ogren and muffled curses from underneath him, until something finally gave. Specifically, the bolts holding the table's top to its brass. Physics being physics, the slightly bent metal tabletop flew off with enough force to, well, sheer metal bolts. The good news...
Hey man, I don't think you want to know. I don't think you want to know. I don't want to know. None of us want to know.
For the chinless mob boss was that said force was in the opposite direction from him. The bad news for the two goons behind Sarge was that he still had all 5 augmetic digits firmly embedded in the table's surface and was pivoting with every ounce of force and weight his beefy non-com frame could muster.
Yay!
The whirring square of metal wasn't razor-edged, but still had more than enough sheer mass to crumple the chest of the goon who didn't duck in time, and seriously concuss the one who nearly did. According to Sarge's vaguely defined plan, the bloody tabletop of justice should have continued its arc and smashed into the mob boss right where his chin wasn't, literally decapitating the whole criminal organization in a single blow.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, tables aren't exactly known for being a high-precision weapon, and neither was Sarge, for that matter. Outside, Doc, Tink, the trainees, and a score of assorted goons all flinched as the shed's door blew off its hinges and a ballistic table wobbled overhead like a badly thrown frisbee. There was a pause, followed by a screech of, "Waste 'em!" and the sound of someone panic-firing a silenced auto pistol.
Uh-huh.
The ensuing brawl had 2 distinct parts. Outside, Doc and Tink jumped one of the 2 exterior door guards, while the ex-cleric and guardsman did for the other. But by the time both goons were down, a perimeter had formed around the group, with the shed door in the no-man's land between. Things then stalled for a bit.
Okay.
On one side, this was because Doc and Tink's group was outnumbered 4-1, and that was counting the snoring Commissar, mind you. On the other side, it was because, well, they outnumbered Doc and Tink's group 4-1. So there was no reason why they had to be the first one to jump in and catch a wrench to the jaw. Far better to go second or third, or maybe just stay back at the yell, yeah, and get them until it was time to loot the corpses.
Right.
This is, of course,
understandable.
Why sergeants were invented, but the goons seemed to be rather short on those. So the fight stalled out while everyone just stood there and listened to the shouts and thumps coming from the shed. Per long-standing narrative tradition, the standoff was broken by a thrown bottle.
Of course.
Said bottle's contents were a matter of debate, which is to say, Twitch felt it should have contained 90% alcohol, a gelling agent, and a burning rag, while Nubian, the trainee, had argued in favor of something that wouldn't draw the attention of every commissar in the camp, including the ones manning the inward-facing heavy stubbers up on the walls.
Especially those. Those would not be the best idea to get the attention of. I'm just saying.
In the end, the demo trooper had settled for a mix of the floor and drain cleaners he'd liberated from the laundry's supply closet, which didn't have quite the same effect as a proper Molotov, but still left 3 men coughing and clawing at their eyes as Twitch and Nubby's group mounted their charge.
Okay.
The inside portion of the brawl was, if possible, even less organized. While Sarge's opener had done a number on the entrenching tool-armed goons behind him, it not only failed to remove the mob boss's auto pistol from the equation, it hadn't even upset the man's balance. On the bright side, it's rather hard to simultaneously balance a chair on 2 legs, accurately fire a gun, and scream in terror as an enraged non-com throws himself towards you. This meant Sarge only took 2 of the 4 shots sent his way as he closed to melee range, and he managed to dodge 2 more through the masterful strategy of tripping over one of the concussed goon's feebly twitching legs and falling flat on his face. Sarge still managed to make a grab for the auto pistol on his way down, and most certainly would have snagged the weapon if the mob boss hadn't chosen that exact moment to finally teeter over backwards.
Nice.
So, on one side of the room, there was Amy, still struggling to claw her way out from under the moaning goon grin. On the other,
Amy crushed his balls until he passed out, and she pretty much buried herself under a half organ. Nice.
Door guard was busy coughing blood while his companion stared vaguely around the room and tried to remember how his legs worked. So, with both Sarge and the mob boss lying on the floor, that meant the only person in the room still standing was the big dumb goon. Fortunately, the man lived up to his name and didn't immediately sprint over and start stomping on Sarge's head. Instead, he took a few seconds to cram the transfer orders in a pocket and grab one of the fallen entrenching tools.
Of course.
Before slowly swaggering his way across the room while thumping the tool in his hand and doing his best evil goon laugh he could manage with a broken nose.
Nice.
He was rather surprised when Sarge decided not to just lie there waiting for his skull to be caved in, and grabbed the nearest available weapon, the mob boss's folding chair.
It's WWE time, my guys.
Once again, Sarge spun around in a blur of metal, blood, and simmering non-com rage, and where the bloody tabletop of justice failed, the equally bloody folding chair of vengeance did the trick.
The folding chair of vengeance.
The big dumb goon blinked as the entrenching tool abruptly vanished from his hand, along with most of the sensation in that arm. Next to him, the now reconcussed door guard flopped over in a boneless heap, and a little further along, the chinless mob boss staggered to his feet and raised the auto pistol, just in time for the chair to sail under it, hit him square in the center of mass, and ragdoll him into the far wall. The mob boss wasn't the first thing to hit the wall, though.
Oh.
He was beaten there by Amy, thanks to a flailing Ogren-sized boot to the backside, right as the markswoman finally managed to claw her way out from under its owner. Amy opened her eyes to find the room upside down and a ballistic mob boss bearing down on her, and immediately closed them again. When she reopened them, the sight of a silenced auto pistol pointed directly at her nose refocused her attention nicely.
It does
after
that.
Taking a second to see if the owner was going to pull the trigger, the markswoman lunged for the gun. At roughly the same time as Amy reached for the auto pistol, the Goongrin finished climbing to his feet.
The Goongrin, I love it.
And no longer blocked by his bolt, the room's rear door burst open to admit 4 legionnaires equipped with knives and entrenching tools. Amy
Shovels.
attempted some quick math involving the auto pistol's clip size, the number of shots fired, and how many more goons were likely to be on the way, and then settled for pressing the gun against the limp mob boss's head and screaming at everyone to freeze. There was a long, tense silence, broken only by a sort of wet and crunchy sound from the man's neck-chin hybrid, as the gun's barrel pushed his head over sideways. And then farther sideways, and farther, and farther. Outside, the fight had stalled again. The mob boss's shouted command and Twitch and Nubby's surprise attack had briefly escalated things, but without any real leadership present on either side, everyone's self-preservation instincts had taken over.
We win
The good
automatically,
news was
guys.
that our little force had managed to steadily creep towards the door over the course of the brawl, and Doc was able to take a peek at the mess inside and relay the situation while the rest of us covered his back. Mind you, the angle of the door meant that Doc couldn't see the wall where Amy and the mob boss had landed, or even as far as where Sarge was desperately trying to remain on his feet, for that matter. So, from the rest of our perspectives, what followed was a bit confusing. First, someone yelled, "Freeze!" Then, someone yelled, "They worked the boss!" And then, there'd been a long pause.
Okay.
As everyone looked at the big dumb goon. Doc described for all present a dawning expression of, sort of looks like one of those little smash-faced, bug-eyed dogs slowly realizing it's been left unattended next to a steak dinner and trying to figure out what to do next. Further commentary was cut off as the big dumb goon pointed a finger and began to yell something.
Okay.
Only to be interrupted himself by an ear-ringing, window-rattling, parade ground bellow of "Commissar down! Riot in the storage sheds!" Needless to say, Sarge's decision to call the entire bloody commissariat down on us caught everyone by surprise, including Sarge. What exactly was supposed to have happened next was a mystery, which he later blamed on the fact that he'd been a bit busy and, shot. What did happen was that everyone present, with the exception of the abruptly awakened old commissar, froze in place as the guards up on the walls started yelling at each other and the spotlights mounted on their heavy stubbers began playing across the surrounding area. Then, an alarm began to blare from the direction of the command building, and the big dumb boss screamed at his men to kill us and hide the bodies before the redcoats arrived while he handled the old man, and then valiantly sprinted past his reinforcements and out the back door.
Of course.
Doc relayed this to all the rest of the group, and by extension, all of the surrounding goons, too. There were a few seconds of thoughtful silence, punctuated by the occasional meaty thump and a silenced auto pistol shot from inside. Not to mention the distinct non-sound of nearly a third of the goons not having been anywhere near there tonight, sir. No, sir. And then the remaining two-thirds charging. Within a few seconds, Twitch and 2 of the trainees were bleeding. Doc was being pulled up out of a muddy faceplant by another trainee. Nubby was casually sliding towards the crawlspace under the shed, and Tink had been viciously bottled in the back of the head by the old commissar. Inside, Sarge looked around fruitlessly for any more readily weaponizable furniture, and then swore and threw himself into a downright impressive dive for the fleeing boss. His subsequent combat role under 3 out of 4 wildly swinging entrenching tools and smashing through 2 pairs of legs would have been more impressive if the legs hadn't belonged to Amy's chair. The resulting confused half-chair, half-non-com wrecking ball smashed into the wall next to the door and slid to the floor, where it alternated between bleeding, swearing, and trying to bludgeon the ankles of the 4 confused reinforcement goons.
Okay.
Amy missed all this on account of the half-Ogren trying to rip her head off. Well, more determinedly...
Typically, a half-Ogren or any kind of Ogren trying to rip your head off is going to be monumentally distracting. I'm just saying. Monumentally distracting.
Waddling towards her with his knees held tightly together, but there was no questioning the murderous rage in those piggy little eyes. So, the markswoman dropped the mob boss's corpse, took aim, and placed an auto pistol round directly into the half-Ogren's forehead. Her expression when the bullet bounced off with a little hollow bonk and a...
I was going to say, if she actually managed to kill this thing, I was going to be surprised.
wee-oo sound would have been amusing if anyone had the attention to spare. In a panicked reflex, Amy flipped the fire selector to auto and tried again. 2 of the 6 subsonic rounds wound up in the ceiling, 1 hit the dead mob boss, and the remaining 3 just stopped, firmly embedded in the half-Ogren's forehead as the big guy kept coming.
That's bad.
There was another moment of panic as Amy realized she had somewhere between 1 and 3 bullets left, and if she crawled fast, about 10 seconds in which to use them.
Right.
Fortunately, the markswoman's training kicked in before she ran out of either, and she belatedly shifted her aim downwards. The half-Ogren's eyes widened, and he clapped both his hands over his groin, only to keel over to the sides as Amy shot out his left knee with her last 2 bullets instead.
Oh my god.
She then swore as the big bastard just started crawling towards her. In the middle of this chaotic little melee, math was happening.
Oh.
Well, not math per se. Tink had a bit of a concussion, so it was more vaguely shaped math blobs slowly drifting across his brain like fuzzy little clouds as he desperately tried to stay upright.
Okay.
It involved X goons, Y guardsmen, and Z seconds until the commissariat arrived.
Oh.
And Z was worryingly large. He vaguely looked around, registering an entire drop shuttle's worth of real bad shit, and the considerably less than Z seconds left before it really started going down. Tink's gaze finally landed back on the old Commissar, indiscriminately menacing everyone nearby with the jagged remains of the bottle he'd just broken over Tink's head. In a flash of inspiration, the techie pulled out the Commissar's data slate, ducked under the wildly swinging bottle, grabbed the man's non-drinking hand, and jammed the greasy sausage-fingered paw down onto the data slate's big red button.
Nice.
He then flopped to the ground, flailing around like a fish as his Penal Legion discipline collar replaced his nervous system with white-hot razor wire.
Lovely.
Whatever the big dumb boss had done to slow down the arrival of the commissariat must have worked, because it was a solid and very unpleasant 2 more minutes before the relief force arrived, and found Amy and the old Commissar surrounded by spastically twitching legionnaires. The pointy hats arrived in 2 distinct groups. The first one consisted of the old sour-faced bastard, backed up by his entire retinue of cadets, and with the big dumb boss nervously lurking right behind him, you know, just to make things obvious.
Right.
Or he was lurking until he crossed the invisible 50-meter radius around the Commissar's data slate and abruptly flopped over onto the mud like the rest of us.
Nice.
Sourface actually stopped for him, or at least to give him a few kicks, before grumpily taking out his own data slate and tapping in an override command. We all enjoyed a brief second of blessed relief, and then the collars reactivated as the drunk old bastard mashed his thumb back down on the panic button while stubbornly glaring at his counterpart. Nobody except Amy was in any condition to appreciate the ensuing pissing match. She described it as a struggle of wills worthy of story and fucking song, and gleefully recounted Sourface's expression when he finally stomped across the field to wrest the data slate away. Just in time for the second group of commissars to arrive and ask what in the Emperor's name he was doing.
Guys, we're going to call it for here tonight. 2 reasons. 1, a fan with too much time is putting out his next episode of Star Wars vs. 40k, and I know some of you guys are really anxious to get to that. And 2, I'm being kidnapped by the Hospitaller. We are going to be checking out a fan with too much time in the next few days. But guys, join me tomorrow night for the second half of the All Guardsmen Party Penal Legion. Thank you guys so much for being here. X and chat if you had some fun tonight. Came to a good stopping point. I've been waiting for it to get to a good stopping point. We got there. X and chat if you had some fun tonight, guys. You raised rabbits for commercial sell? Had 500 out of the one. Oh. Oh, that sucks. That sucks. Alright, guys. Part 2 tomorrow night. I hope you guys had fun. And we will get back to the All Guardsmen Party tomorrow night. Oh my goodness, Fox. That sounds so bad. Elise! Hey! Alright. Alright. God. What happens when you give a whole bunch of idiots command of shot callers? Exactly what you think would happen. Exactly what you think would happen. Oh, God. I'll catch you guys next time.